All right, thank you so much for that warm welcome, Rebecca. And I'm very honored to be here and to be able to present my research today to everyone. I'm very happy and grateful for the Rotary Peace Fellowship and what it has offered me in terms of experiences, the opportunity to live in Japan and also to travel to Myanmar and learn more about Asia overall. So without too much ado, let's just start the presentation. My research has been, as Rebecca said, on Myanmar. What this picture shows is the most recent image caught of the Rohingya, or otherwise known now in the international community as boat people, stranded in somewhere in the area of the Gulf of Thailand. This group of refugees had attempted to go to Thailand, Indonesia, and Malaysia to seek refuge, but they were denied access to both of those countries and turned away. So they floundered in the middle of the sea, while Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia felt pressure by the international community to offer some type of assistance to them. So this image shows Thailand sending out its naval ships and a military helicopter to drop food in the ocean for them to pick up and take back to the boat until further decisions were made on what to do with these people. They were in the middle of the ocean, they were in the middle of the sea for almost 2 months on that boat. What this international crisis led to were protests within Myanmar, and protests saying that don't blame Myanmar for the Rohingya issue. The Rohingya are not from Myanmar. They're not Burmese. They're not something that are Myanmar's responsibility. And this was led by Buddhist nationalists. Now, I usually don't like using the term Buddhist nationalist or Buddhist terrorist, just like I don't like using the name or the term Islamist terrorist or Muslim terrorist, because it generalizes a whole group of people and to some degree dehumanizes a whole group of people. So when I'm using this term, Buddhist nationalist, it's not representative of all Buddhists around the world. It does not represent all Buddhists within Myanmar. It represents a very unique, small group of people who believe in nationalism and very dogmatic ideas. My research question for my thesis then became, how has the discourse of securitization been used by the Myanmar government and state actors to impact the human security of the Rohingya and other ethno-Burmese Muslims in Myanmar? And what this picture shows are the people that were on the same boat earlier, swimming out to the sea, getting the food and bringing it back to the boat. And I was really interested in not just examining the experiences that the Rohingya have in Myanmar, but also kind of learning about what other Burmese Muslims are experiencing within the country. So, premised on the research question, my central argument of the thesis focused on how the origins of the insecurity of Myanmar's Muslims lies in the securitization of religion by the Myanmar government to impact the human security of the Rohingya and other ethnic Muslims in Myanmar. So Nikki gave a really great primer for what securitization is and also a reminder of what dehumanization is, and Anna also touched upon that. So some of my arguments are based on also those types of theoretical frameworks. I also argue within my thesis and my research here how the origins of this insecurity lies in British colonial policies that denigrated Buddhism, which was an intricate part of Burmese culture, leading to creating space for nationalist Buddhist narratives. And then lastly, I also argued in my research, which will be seen in this slideshow, how a package of laws that has just been passed in Myanmar called the Protection of Race and Religion contributes to the securitization of religion and gender identities of both Buddhist women and Muslim men. So this protection of race and religion laws, which I will talk about later, basically emphasizes how some humans in Myanmar are considered to be more human than others. So I am going to talk a little bit about the different stories I've heard within Myanmar through interviews I conducted on the ground. This is a man named Shine Win, and he was someone I interviewed within Myanmar who is a leader. He's an interfaith leader. So I have a volunteer, Inuma-san, who will say his share Shine's experience in Japanese.
私、東京グローバルロータリークラブの飯沼です。1時間半前にこのカラーさんの役を日本語で演じてくれと頼まれましたんで、今ちょっと下手ですがやってみます。それは交差点で起こりました。彼らは私を襲ってきて殴り蹴りました。女性にも靴や傘、石で殴られました。ボートに取り囲まれて私は逃げることができませんでした。私は地面に倒れてしまいました。彼らは私の腕や足をつかみ、傘の鋭い先端で私を刺しました。彼らは私の首をかき切ろうとしました。しかし私の友人が人混みの中にまで入ってきて、警察と一緒に暴動を止めようとしました。これがカラーさんのテスティモニーです。
So Shine's experience basically touches upon how his experience being in Rakhine as a representative of the Malaysia Relief Agency and an attack that he experienced where people had confused him with being a Rohingya and had called him a foreigner, an Indian, and also derogatory terms for basically based on his Muslim identity, without really having any confirmation from him that he was a Muslim or he is an Indian. It was all based on his racial identity. And so one word that it comes up a lot across all of my interviews and in some of the research I've done is color, which is a derogatory term referring to Muslims and Indians. But on the other hand, Shine is also a leader of the Interfaith Youth Coalition for AIDS in Myanmar and has been pivotal in bringing together people from different faith communities, including Buddhist and Christian communities, to work on AIDS, issues of HIV/AIDS awareness. So it kind of shows the complexity of the issues and identities that are playing a role. So now just moving on to a historical timeline. This timeline represents how things have progressed over the last 400 or 500 years in Myanmar. It began with the Murakul dynasty, which had really great ties with the Bengali Sultan next door to the Arakan state. And the diplomatic ties that formed in 1430 led to almost 350 years of Muslim presence within Myanmar that resulted in trade, agricultural development, different kinds of diplomatic relationships. And this was recorded within in documents, historical documents, but is also seen within Buddhist temples where there is both the presence of Arabic, Persian, and Pali script as a way to, from both kings, to kind of represent the commitment to the diplomatic ties they had agreed upon. In 1799, the first documented account of the Rohingya was discovered. And this is important to note because right now the Buddhist nationalists in Myanmar are arguing that there is no presence of Muslims within Myanmar. There's never been any presence of Muslims in Myanmar, and there is no presence of Rohingya ever in Myanmar. So historical documentation refutes those claims. In 1885, Myanmar had been subjected to British colonialism. This led to the denigration or the demotion of Buddhism as it was seen in that society. So that meant that the children will not be taught at monasteries anymore as they traditionally were. So instead of being taught in Buddhist monasteries, the British introduced a very secular form of education and forced everyone to learn English, as well as other forms of denigration of Buddhist culture and presence. There was also a small amount of time with Japanese occupation during World War II. And then in 1945, they gained independence. With independence, there was a struggle, as there were in many former colonies, and it eventually led to the assassination of Aung San, who is the father of Aung San Suu Kyi, and then basically led to the path of a military coup and a military junta ruling Myanmar for almost 30 years until 2011. So what does human security mean? Human security is a new concept that is portrayed as a new concept. I have used the human security theoretical lens to look at this conflict. And human security was adopted by the UNDP, United Nations Development Program, in 1994. And it moves from basically the state or the government viewing protecting its boundaries, its national boundaries, as the main responsibility of its legitimacy to protecting the individual and being responsible for providing for the individual. Now, why does it do this? Because governments get their legitimacy, according to human security, from the individual within the state. So citizens vote. They vote in a government. That government, in turn, should be providing protection and safety and all the needs that they have. So it ensures giving them freedom of fear, which means they won't be subjected to violence. Freedom from want, which means they won't be subjected to going hungry, needing shelter, having access to healthcare, and they have the freedom of dignity, the freedom to practice their faith within any way they want, freedom to be who they are in terms of their identity. So what does securitization look like? So Nikki's already gone over this, and I'll just touch on it briefly. Securitization involves 4 different elements. There's a securitizing actor, the person or the government, as Nikki has said, that passes a law, passes policy to act on something. There's a referent object. That is something that needs to be protected, that's in danger, it's very urgent, that it should be protected. There's a speech act. So there's a message. You can't securitize something if you don't say that that thing is a threat. So you have to say that thing is a threat, and we need to securitize it. So there's a message within securitization that's critical. And then there's the audience. The people in the state have to be willing to buy in to the fact that there is a threat and it needs to be securitized, and new laws should be passed to do that. So then in turn, it just essentially boxes in the perceived threat and securitizes it. The perceived threat is something that not everyone sees as a threat, but a group of people see it as a threat, and it becomes something that is securitized. So, taking a look at lived experiences, I was able to do 27 interviews in Myanmar that examined the experiences of various Muslim groups, not just Rohingya Muslims. And so this is a group of people I was able to talk to from the University Muslim Students Network, and they shared many of their experiences as students living in Yangon and around Myanmar. Such as the women being asked to remove their hijab when they went to universities or when they went to government offices. So they had definitely different types of experiences with not just discrimination, but harassment. So this is a short video I wanted to play really quickly, if possible, of this Rohingya.
They're stateless, impoverished, and victims of ongoing human rights abuses. But how much do you know about the Rohingya of Myanmar? I'm Dina Tikururi, and here's a look at one of the world's most persecuted minorities. Myanmar, the country formerly known as Burma, was long considered a pariah state ruled by a military junta. But in 2011, half a century of military rule came to an end with democratic elections. But democracy hasn't brought universal freedom to all the people of Myanmar. And in Rakhine State, the rise of a militant branch of Buddhist nationalists has sparked what Human Rights Watch has called an ethnic cleansing against the minority Muslim population. Myanmar is at a geographic crossroad between China and India. It also shares borders with Bangladesh, Laos, and Thailand, which means it has long been ethnically diverse. In fact, the country recognizes 134 ethnic groups, but refuses to consider the 1.3 million Rohingya one of them, even though they've lived in Myanmar for centuries and call it their homeland. In 1982, a law was passed that denied them citizenship formally. They can't travel or get married without permission, they can't own land, and some of them are forbidden from having more than 2 children. Recently, in 2014, they were excluded from the country's first census in 30 years. To the majority of the country, they're merely squatters who illegally immigrated from Bangladesh. Over the past 2 years, long-simmering tensions erupted, with Rohingya coming under attack by mobs of Buddhist nationalists who claim that they are protecting the country against a Muslim invasion. It's Myanmar's worst bloodshed in generations, with Rohingya being burned out of their homes and held in de facto open-air prisons. Hundreds have died in various massacres. Fearful for their lives, several 100,000 Rohingya have had no choice but to flee. Here's how one Rohingya refugee who fled Myanmar described it. Being stateless and displaced makes them vulnerable to human traffickers who often extort money to get them across borders. Men get sold into indentured slavery, and women are sold as brides. Hundreds die at sea when their ships capsize. Myanmar is basically throwing its international legitimacy in question through its treatment of its most vulnerable minority. The violence against the Rohingya has also become a challenge for Nobel Peace Prize winner Aung San Suu Kyi's image as a unifying moral force. She's a devout Buddhist and now opposition leader in parliament. But this is what she had to say about the Rohingya.
No, it's not ethnic cleansing. It's a new problem, and yet it's linked to old problems as well.
So now that you know a bit more about the Rohingya people's plight, how do you think the international community should act?
So what's being said is, so basically got an introduction to the Rohingya people, but also their plight and how they are being securitized within Myanmar. Now, this is a monk named Virathu, who is a founding member of the 969 movement, which is a Buddhist nationalist, ultra-nationalist group that is claiming that Islam is a threat to Buddhism and to the Burmese people. The vision, the mission of the 969 movement is to create a national identity, a national Myanmar and a national Buddhist identity that doesn't really allow much space for many other ethnic or religious groups that are living within Myanmar. Is Islam on the rise in Myanmar? So you see this yellow bar. The yellow bar basically signifies how many Buddhists are in the country. 89% of the country is Buddhist. 4% are Muslim, 4% are Christian, and 2% are animist. This basically shows that at this point, Islam isn't nearly even to what the Buddhist population is. But the Harvard Ash Center, in its research, showed that there hasn't been any significant growth within the Muslim population in Myanmar since the 1950s. In fact, the population of Muslims in Myanmar has decreased by a few percentage points. So the movement is... Islam really isn't showing, at least when it comes to research, that it's rising in Myanmar. So just to go over briefly, the Protection of Race and Religion law that has been passed in May in Myanmar, it bans interfaith marriages. So people like Aung San Suu Kyi, who was married to a British man, and he wasn't Burmese and he wasn't Buddhist, those type of marriages wouldn't have been allowed. It also prevents people from converting to religion without getting permission from the state. The bill also has enforced monogamy and also population control. So population control means it restricts how many children Burmese people can have. So all of these different laws are, this Protection of Race and Religion law was in fact supported and in part created by the 969 movement. So to end, I think that one of the things transitioning to a democracy since 2011 that Myanmar should consider is thinking amongst post-secular approaches, especially in terms of allowing the space for the various ethnic and religious groups that exist in the country to articulate their faith and beliefs. That maybe a traditional model of democracy, such as separation of church and state and church wouldn't allow. Thank you.
Thank you, Sana. That was very interesting, and we know that the topic is very current at the moment. So we have time for one question from the audience. So does anybody have a question? Oh, I have two hands. I let this man decide.
I think, Ron, it seems that, for an island nation like Japan, this is not too relevant, but for an island nation like Japan, this is not too relevant. But for countries like Burma or Myanmar or Ukraine, where it is a land border state, these borders tend to sort of fluctuate between one another. And I think in the case of the Rohingyas, I remember many years ago that there was a issue about Buddhists living in Bangladesh who were kicked out of Bangladesh because of their faith, and basically, facing a very similar situation. So it seems to me that the situation where the Rohingyas are right now sort of persecuted in Burma, I keep saying Burma, I'm an old person, so you have to pardon me about that, is sort of a phenomenon that is not just necessarily limited to Myanmar, but to countries which have land borders which have tended to fluctuate over time. And would you have that kind of understanding, or is it more sort of peculiar to Myanmar that you kind of think?
I think that's a really interesting question, particularly because when Myanmar got its independence, originally it was decided on being almost kind of various federal states under one type of government, but each federal state would have autonomy. And the reason it was like that was because most of these areas where different ethnic groups live, such as the Arakan state where the Rohingya are, were separate kingdoms, and they weren't under one Burmese or Myanmar name. So they have very strong ethnic identities because they were separate kingdoms that under British colonialism were brought together under one large colony. So part of the reason that the borders were securitized in the way they were was because of the independence and the separation from the British. And what ended up happening after Aung San was assassinated was they were denied autonomy, and civil wars broke out amongst the various ethnic groups. So the borders weren't fluctuating as much as they were trying to get everyone to be under one type of identity and be ruled by one hierarchical government. So I think what you've pointed out in your question is one of the cruxes of the problem is the recognition and autonomy of various ethnic groups in the country that could help in at least having a more productive peace process in terms of dialogue and what's happening with the ceasefire negotiation in the country.
Okay, thank you very much, Tana.